Hey everybody, Jeff Miller here, head of GMAT instruction at Target Test Prep. Happy to be back with you, and today we are going to discuss, should I retake the GMAT? We're going to go through some content-based reasons for when you should retake the GMAT, as well as some non-content-based reasons for retaking the GMAT. To start, let's get into some non-content related reasons why your GMAT did not go the way you expected it to, and a reason to retake it. The first of those reasons is test day anxiety. I gotta tell you, this is a GMAT killer. I talk to students almost every day who come back from their GMAT. They were super prepared. They go in and things just don't go well. They were so nervous. They couldn't see straight. They couldn't recall formulas. Things that just weren't happening on their practice exams, and that's how we know it's test day anxiety. Now, here's the good news. If you can get that anxiety sorted out, then you should retake the GMAT right away. Take it 16 days later if you can, but you gotta make sure you have your anxiety in check. There's a lot of things you can do. There's breathing techniques that you can employ. There are things that you can do from a visualization perspective, and overall, kind of just tell yourself, you know what? Yeah, the GMAT is a big deal, but I'm gonna be okay. If something doesn't go well, like we're talking about now, I'll just retake the test. And if you can kind of reframe and restructure your mindset, I'm confident that you can retake this thing 16 days later and get the score you need and get the score you deserve. Reason number 2, the test center environment threw you off your game. Again, this happens a lot. I mean, look, the test center is an odd place. If you haven't been there, it's a pretty sterile environment. There's a long check-in process. You have to get your palm printed, read. They're giving you markers to check before you go in. They're handing you a test booklet. Then they're walking you to your desk. It's just a process that you're probably not used to. And, you know, we always say, take your practice exams in a test-like condition. So go to the library, for example. You can do all that, but it doesn't mean you're going to be fully prepared for that first time you walk into the test center. So if that was an issue for you, then of course, retaking it 16 days later would make sense. And there's other things. It's not just the test center environment in general. Maybe something happened when you were taking your test. Maybe there was a malfunction with your computer or even your keyboard, or the person sitting next to you was taking an exam where they were typing a lot and smacking on the keyboard, and that threw you off. I mean, there's just a lot of different ways that you could be thrown off your game, right? So again, same deal. Just take the darn thing 16 days later. The chances are you'll be at a much better place and those things won't happen again. And same deal with the GMAT online. If you had an issue, your internet went off, your dog was barking, there was fire trucks going by, anything like that that potentially threw you off your game, again, reschedule, retake, don't wait months to do it. Again, lightning is not going to strike twice. You'll probably be fine the next time you take your test and get your desired score. Reason number 3, you just had a bad day. These things happen, trust me, and it's not just with the GMAT, it's in all aspects of life. I mean, think about your professional career. Would you say every time you show up at work, you're performing at a 10 out of 10 level? Or can you look at certain days or certain time frames, you're like, man, things just didn't go my way that day? Happens in sporting events. How many times have you watched a professional athlete who's at the top of his or her game just not perform to their ability level? It happens. So why couldn't it happen to you in the GMAT? Well, the fact is it absolutely can. You could go into the test center feeling great or go into your online GMAT feeling great and for whatever reason just not perform. Sure, it could be anxiety like we said or the test center environment. Or maybe you just chalk it up to saying, wow, I just didn't perform at my best today, and here's what that means. Reschedule, retake. 16 days later, get it out of the way. There's no possible way, if it was just a fluke bad day, that 16 days later it's going to happen again. It means you can go in there, knock this thing out, and be done with your GMAT. Reason number 4, timing issues. Now, timing issues can come in many shapes and sizes, and the reasoning can differ based on the student. But let's say you were doing totally fine timing-wise on your practice exams. You were tracking the time, you weren't going over 3 minutes per question, and you weren't getting caught up or bogged down with any specific number of questions on those practice exams. But then let's say in the real thing, all of that goes out the window. Let's say on question number 1, you're so spooked, you know you should be able to get that question right, but you just can't. And for whatever reason, you're not willing to give up on it, and then your timing is messed up for the entire exam. Or let's say you are skipping questions too quickly. You know, every time you think you're at the 2-minute mark, you're moving on and you're rushing, but that's not something you were doing on your practice exams. Well, all of these small tweaks in timing are going to probably lead to a negative in your overall GMAT score. So what that means is you got to step back, you got to regroup, and you got to look at the things that worked that got you to the point you were at, and don't change things up on test day. This is so important. Doing things differently on the day of your exam as opposed to what you were doing on your practice exams, it's never going to help you, because you're not in a position to be able to effectively execute those changes. So if you're doing something odd with your timing on test day, or maybe you just made a few mistakes, reschedule, retake in that 16-day time frame, and get this thing knocked out. So again, you can be where you need to with your GMAT score. Now let's talk about some content reasons. Now, what I want you to understand is if content is your issue or your lack of content knowledge, then everything I was saying before about retaking 16 days later probably goes out the window. Because if content is the reason why you're not scoring where you need to be, well, what does that mean? Well, it means, okay, you probably weren't fully prepared for the test. So what could those reasons be? Well, 1, maybe you rushed your prep. Maybe you tried to get done in your GMAT prep in 2 months when you really needed 4 to 6 months. Or maybe you just weren't using great prep materials. And if that's the case, go back, do some research, find some materials, maybe target test prep if you haven't used us yet, and then maybe start your prep over again. These are some small but really important reasons how maybe your content knowledge didn't develop and why you should retake the GMAT. But again, don't take the thing 16 days later. Do not. This is not a situation where if you were well off your target score, you can just rat-a-tat-tat, keep taking GMATs over and over till you hit your score. You got to step back. You got to reevaluate your study plan, get back into it, really build your knowledge up, make sure you're hitting your target scores on practice tests, and then finally retake the GMAT. So of course, the $1 million question is this: do I retake or do I not retake my GMAT? Now, I realize that we're not in a vacuum when we're asking this question. So there are some very simple things or frameworks that we can follow of, for example, when not to retake it. I think that's probably the easier thing to discuss first. So for example, let's say your application deadlines are in a few weeks, you take your GMAT, the schools are not going to accept a score after the application deadline. Well, in that case, you can't really retake it because they're not going to take a higher or a different score after that. Now, of course, if you're well in the range of where you should be, then you're set. If you're not, well, then you got to start reevaluating. Do I want to apply to a different round? Do I want to apply in a different cycle? These are decisions you'll have to make. And if you decide, yes, that's what I'll have to do, then fine. You will eventually have to retake it. But again, if your GMAT score falls in the average range that you need it to fall in, then you're good. Stand pat, submit your application deadlines, and see what happens. Another example, well, let's say you're scoring 680s on your practice exam and you score 730 on your GMAT. Well, wow, in that case, since you outperformed your practice exams, and that's a great score, I don't see any reason to actually retake the exam. You got a great GMAT score, spend your time doing things to improve your application. Now, when to retake is a lot of the reasons we talked about before. If you just underperformed based on how you were doing on your practice exams because of anxiety, the test center, having a bad day, then yes, you've got to retake the test. I mean, I think it's going to be obvious to you of when you need to retake it or when you don't need to retake it, just based on what your target score is and what you truly feel you need from a GMAT perspective for admissions. But to just reiterate from what I said earlier, if you have any of those non-content reasons creeping in and you didn't score well in your GMAT, don't feel bad. Understand that this affects a lot of people. Just reschedule the test, knock it out, hit your target score, and call it a day. So that concludes today's video. I had a blast talking with you all about reasons when you should or should not retake your GMAT. If you enjoyed today's video, please subscribe so you can get updates on future videos. And of course, if you have any video ideas that you want to see me cover, leave a comment. I'd be happy to check that out and get to them in the coming weeks. Thanks again for joining, and we will talk soon.